Hello friends, welcome back to the Android training series by host-tune-perform.com. And today we will be starting up with chapter 6, that is Fragments in Android. So we have already discussed a little about fragments in previous chapters, but let us go ahead and discuss something more about it before we discuss about the agenda of today. So, what exactly are fragments? We have a mobile phone like this, and every mobile phone has a activity which like represents the basic container of the phone, and each activity has two parts. So, one is the Java code which controls the activity, and second is the XML file which defines the layout. This is what like we have studied as of now. And today we will be talking about fragments. So what are fragments? Fragments are something like which are over the activity. What does this mean? The fragments are something which are over the activity. So we have this activity. Now we can do one thing. Like we have designed the layout of this activity, and now if we have to change the layout of this activity of some part, then we cannot do it. What we can do as of now is we can move on to another activity, and we will have to like define the layout again. But what if you have to like define the layout of only this part? This is where the fragments come into picture, and what you say is like inside this XML file, which is this, which defines the layout of this particular activity, you will say that this particular part belongs to fragment. Correct. So there will be one entry in this XML file, and this entry will define that this particular thing is for fragment. This entry can either be in the XML or this can be in the Java. So you can create fragment in two ways. Now one is static and second is dynamic. So if you are creating up the fragment in static format, then you will define up this particular container directly as per the frame within the XML. Or else if you're defining it dynamically, then in XML you just need to define in a container, a view group. It should not be necessarily a fragment. And then you like in Java code, while like dynamically you can say that this particular view group is a fragment and will be used as a fragment. So do not worry about it. You will get all these things in detail while we implement it. I am just trying to take you through a shorter picture so that you can understand what all things we will be going on during this chapter. So this is how like you implement these things. Then when we say that you have like booked up the space, so as of now you have only booked up the space for fragment. So this space is booked for the fragment, but now this fragment should have its own layout, right? So each fragment, we'll say it's like this, each fragment has its own layout file, which is again XML, and second Java file for controlling this particular fragment. So let us now discuss about the scenario which we will be doing on. So here in this case we will be having an application where we will have an activity, and this activity like what it will show you up, this activity will have a button over here, and this button will be like something like which will control up this fragment. So here we will be showing up only one fragment, and as a person clicks on this particular button, the second fragment will be shown up then, right? So this is what like we are going to do. So for this we will be requiring up two fragments. Here we will be saying that we will be requiring up two fragments, and like each of them will have their its own layout file and its own Java file, right? So I hope like this is clear that in this particular case we will be having two fragments, and first fragment will be visible at first, but if the person clicks on this button, this particular button, then the first will go off and the second fragment will be shown. So in total, like we will be creating two fragments and a activity. So where we will be putting up this activity? So as of now, like as of now till the time we have covered up this video, we have created these files. This was the second activity during which like we discussed about the SQLite, and this is not required as of now. So what we will do is we will combine this particular activity which we are talking about now, this activity which will be showing up the fragments over here. So in short, like if I run up this application, the Gradle is still building up, it is installing now. So if you run up this application, as the person presses and like goes up to the next activity will be this one, which we will be creating right now. And inside this activity, we will be having two fragments and a button. So let's go ahead and like try to build up this activity. So for building up this activity, let me go here, say new and say activity. I just want an activity and say empty activity. So this will create just an empty activity. But if you want to create two fragments as it is like with this activity, then you can select basic activity. So this will add a floating button, two fragments and a basic activity. So let us not do it this way. Let us start from the empty activity. Just create the activity and let me say this is fragmented activity. I'm just giving up the name, and this is not the launcher, and let me finish it. Two files will be created, one in Java and one in layout. As the Gradle gets finished, okay. So this activity has been like created, and this extends app comeback activity, right? So let us move ahead and like create up the two classes for fragments. So let me say over here and say fragment and say blank fragment and say this is my first fragment, and the layout name is fragment first, source Java, yes, finish. And let me just go ahead over here and say new and say fragment and then say again blank fragment and then say this is my second fragment and let me finish it. So I have got all these files. We will see all of them in a while. As of now, let us just see the count. So you have a basic activity like which where we have the slider button. As we slide till the end, it will open up a new activity, and that activity will be fragmented activity. This activity is taking up its layout from activity fragmented, this one, right? And if we see the next thing, which is the fragment, the first fragment is this, which is the controlling file, and the second fragment is this, which is the controlling file, and like their relative layout files are this, fragment first and fragment second. So if I just go ahead and open up first fragment and see up the code inside the fragment, the first thing is like this class extends fragments. And second thing you will have to notice is like there is a function called as on create view. We'll talk about it in some while. So there is a function called as on create view, and this particular function is like overridden, and this is like saying that please inflate r.layout.fragment first. So this is what I'm saying. This particular Java file is controlling this layout, and this is controlling this layout. The point to notice over here is like there is not a much of a difference between an activity and a fragment, but a fragment, it spreads its layout in this method, which is on create view. So it is this method where it is like creating up the layout, but for activity it was on create method in which the layout was created. You were setting up the contents. You just want to see it. So it was on create, we were setting up the contents, but here the contents are being set up in on create view, right? So after on create view you should like refer up to the components of the fragments. So this was like just a basic idea which should like give you like how we are managing of the files. So we have one Java file for activity, one XML file for activity, then we have two fragments. So we have two Java files, each for fragment which is for controlling, and layout file for fragment. Then in the XML file of the activity you will have to specify the container, right? So this is the activity, and here we will have to specify the container for the fragment, and the container for this fragment can be specified in like two ways. One is static and second is dynamic. So just before we go ahead and like understand about these two types, let us first divide our activity, like this particular activity, into two parts. So let me a copy of the code from our auto funnel application and paste it completely as of now. So here we see that we have a coordinate layout, and inside this we have our first relative layout, which was our outer layout, and inside this relative layout we were having three relative layouts. So I am like, what I'm doing is, let me take up the second one and the third one, and let me delete the first one. I do not require this. So now we have two relative layouts inside this, and there was a change which should happen out here, which should be above as guard. Give me a second, let me see it. uh, Layout with height above below. So this is a text view, match parent, height is this, and this should be from the very top. So let me delete this just, and let me delete this statement as well, and let me save it. Let me go to the design part and see. This looks little good. Let me delete up the, rather than deleting up the image view, this is what we are showing up, right? We are showing up an image, but let me delete it for now. And this relative layout is my first relative layout, which is my first relative layout, and this is about the second one, and second one is this, and let the height for this be 1250. And this particular relative layout has a lot of things. I do not want any one of them. Let me delete all of them. So now the code is simple, right? We have at the outermost side we have the coordinate layout, inside it we have our outer relative layout, and inside this relative layout we have two relative layouts. We are dividing it into two parts. One is this and second is this. So we want it like this to be the below one and this to be the above one. This is what like we talked about, right? We want a panel above and we want a panel below, and the below panel we will have a button. So here we require up a button. So let me just add up a button. So I want normal button. Let me just delete it, move to the design part and just drop in a button out here. And if I go back to my code, I have a button. And let me say it Android align. Let me say center in parent equal to true. So now this button will come up to the like bottom, and the name of the button is button. So let me change it to swipe to another fragment. So I'm just giving it a text, and let me see the design now. So I can see a button out here, right? In this activity I can see a button, and above we have a layout, and in this particular layout we need to set up the fragment. So at first we will set up the static fragment. So here we need to define up the container. So you need to remember one thing, like in this particular XML which is for the activity, you will just define the container, but what will get inflated as a layout inside this container will be given up by fragment first.xml, which is the layout file for the XML. Whatever will be inflated inside this container will be given in this XML. So here again I have to give the container. So how do I give the container? So if you see up my screen out here, I have these two pieces of code, and another is this. So why I have taken a frame layout is because this is the mostly thing used with fragments dynamically, but you can use any view group. So what is a view group? I will just tell you. The first thing is for static, you have to use this element which is fragment, and if you're not using this element and you're using something else other than this element, you have to define it dynamically. So in the sense, you can say that if I just copy it and paste it here as a container, then it you can say like this particular container is for the fragment. For which fragment? The name has been given over here. The name is like the first fragment, right? So this particular place is for the first fragment. But what if you need this particular container to show up a different fragment after a click of a button? This fragment space should be dynamic, right? As of now, you have bounded up this space to the first fragment. So how to make it dynamic, we will see it in a while. So this is the first fragment and this is the container. What this will inflate, this is will inflate this fragment first. Inside this fragment first, we again have a frame layout, and inside this frame layout we have a text view which shows this is my first fragment. So this is all you need to do to set up the static fragment. For now we have like created up the activity, we have created up two fragments, Java files and their corresponding XML files, and then in the activity XML we have defined up the container, and in the fragment XML we have defined what will be inflated in place of this fragment. The last part which is required is I will just go to my auto funnel class, and here in auto funnel class in the move up I have the intent. This intent was like aiming at second activity which we did yesterday for SQLite, and now I have to aim it for fragmented activity. This seems now good, and let me save it and rerun it. So we have the application now, and let me move up to the very end. And as I move up to the very end, you can see that this at the very top it says that this is my first fragment, and we have a swipe button, swipe to another button over here, and this is what like we were saying, like the fragment is done. You can see that it is at the very top. If I need to move it So to bring it back to the center, you will have to go back to the fragment first XML, and then in the text view, instead of match parent, you will have to type wrap content and text center. Instead of that use Android layout gravity and center vertical, center horizontal, pass this value. So this should work now. Let me rerun it. It will get installed in a minute. And here it is. And if I slide it towards the right, so I have my first fragment text in the center now, and there is a button. So now let us go ahead and discuss about dynamic fragment. So to discuss about it, let us go back to the activity fragmented, and here instead of like adding up the fragment, let us add up a layout, and let us add frame layout. So this is the most commonly used container, and let me say fragment id. So this is the fragment id, and this is matching of the parent, and this is the container. Now as you see that in this relative layout we have changed from fragment to frame layout. Now how will this activity come to know that this is actually not a frame layout but it is a fragment? So it will come to know via code, and where we will write up this code, we will write up this code in fragmented activity, which is the controlling Java class for this XML. And what code we will write? So there are two major things which you require to learn over here, which is fragment manager and fragment transaction. So you can manage all the fragment using fragment transaction. What is a transaction? So in SQL, you people must have read, we start up a transaction, we do some actions, then we commit it or roll back. In the similar way, we have fragment transactions, and like it begins the transactions which we have already begun. You can see over here which says the fragment manager dot begin transaction. So now we will add various operations. What kind of operations? We can say fragment transaction dot add. So in add, you can see that you can add up a fragment and then a string, or else like you can add up a fragment and you can combine it with a container view id. So let me add it on the view. So we will say r dot id dot fragment id. So container name was fragment id. Inside the activity xml, we created up a frame layout in which the id was fragment id, and let me keep the name of the fragment, which is just fragment. Let us create up this fragment, and let me say second fragment, and fragment equal to a new second fragment, and let me just close it. So we have new fragment, and like we have added up the fragment, and let me now say fragment transaction dot commit. So now we have committed up the transaction. So this is how like you do it, and rather than having an add function, you can do a lot of things, such as like you can commit, then add, then we can attach, detach. So we will discuss about attach, detach in some while. So then we can like replace one fragment with another. So we have a replace function over here. You can see, then we can remove it. We can find if the like fragment is empty or not, if there is some fragment or not, or there is, and then there is something called as is add to back stack allowed. So we will discuss about this thing, like what exactly is back stack. This is very important thing to understand while working with fragments. But as of now, let us do only a single thing, which is adding up the fragment and then committing up. So here we are beginning of the transaction, we are creating up the fragment, then we are adding it up, and then we are committing it up. Let me save it and let me rerun it. So previously it was showing us, it was the first fragment, and now we are showing up the second fragment. So here we have created up the class of the second fragment, and second fragment has the text hello blank fragment, which is right here. So if I go back over here and just slide it towards the right, so you can see now it says hello blank fragment, which is our second fragment, not the first one. So our dynamic code is working fine. And now we have to like attach things and like give the button a little control, like when it is clicked, the fragment gets changed from one position to another. Before we go ahead and do this, let us understand some theoretical part of like fragments, which are very important. So let me start with it. So we have already discussed on this, like which is like how to write up a fragment in Android. So there is no need to discuss this particular frame. So we all know what all files we will require. Let me move ahead. Then if you see that what kind of activity we can use, what exactly this means. So the activity over here under which we have the fragment is fragmented activity. This one. And this is extending up app combat activity. So you can also extend like saying that fragment activity, there is something called as fragment activity. This will also work. And there is something called as only activity. You can do something like this, but this activity does not have this function. It does not support fragments, so you cannot use this activity with fragments. So you can either use fragment activity or you can use app compact activity. So what exactly is the difference? So the best possible thing which you should use and which is the latest is app compact activity. I will always recommend to use this, but if you do not want backported to be like enabled for you, you can use fragment activity. So what is like backporting? Let me uh, tell you that. So if you can see over here, what is backporting? Backporting is like an action of taking parts from a newer version of the software or software component and porting them to the older version. So if you have built up some application say in 2008 and now it is 2016, and there have been a lot of modification, a lot of new code which have been presented up, but you still want to run some of your like application part in the older environment. So sometimes there is a requirement of like using up the new code in the older environment, and this is what we call it as backporting. Like we are mapping up the new code with the older one. So if you need backporting, obviously like you should always go for the first one. And then if we go ahead, we will learn about the life cycle of the Android fragment. So if we just see the life cycle of the Android fragment, it is very similar to an activity. So as the activity has a lot of callback methods such as on create, on destroy, on pause, on stop. In a similar way, fragment has its own states methods. So which is on attach. So what is attaching and detaching? So the major point which you should learn over here is attaching and detaching. So you can understand it this way. In our scenario, we have an activity. In that activity, we have a frame layout, which is nothing but a view group. And inside this view group, we are putting up a fragment. But we have two fragments, first fragment and second fragment. So both of them gets initialized and remain in the memory. But one is being showed up on the UI and other remains in the memory. Then we click on the button and the second is get showed up and the first one remains in the memory. So what exactly we are doing? We are attaching up one fragment with the front end and we are detaching the second one. So this is what attach and detach is. Attach means like showing it up on the UI, attaching it with the activity. So similarly, we have few other callback methods: on create view, on start, on resume. Then fragment is an active state, and then again like we have on pause, on stop, on destroy, and at the end on detach. And fragments get destroyed. So like this is the life cycle of a fragment, and there are like a few other things which you need to understand as a theoretical part in fragment. So like in this case, we say that we have one container to view the fragment and we have two fragments, right? So this particular container has one fragment now, and after some time this particular container has second fragment. So we are talking about uh, this container which is frame layout and which we have converted dynamically into fragment. So there might be a scenario this container will have a third fragment after 10 seconds more, and then it will have a fourth fragment, and then the first fragment will get repeated. There might be this scenario. So inside a container, what all fragments came and what all went gets tracked via a stack, right? So what exactly is a stack? So let me just open up a new one and let me just show you what exactly is a stack. So stack is nothing but an empty bucket. Now, what do you mean by an empty bucket? So now you go ahead and like keep something in the empty bucket, it will be over here. Then you go ahead and keep up the second thing which will be above it. Then you go up and keep up third thing which will be above it. So stack is something like you are putting up things one of the one over the other, and when you have to remove it, at first you will have to remove the topmost. First this, then second this, and then third this. So in the similar way you can say that at first in the container what was loaded? Fragment 1 was loaded, right? And when like we added up, like replaced it up with second fragment, what happened? Fragment 2 came on the container, but an entry was made up on the back stack that the fragment 2 has come and fragment 1 has like removed. So whenever you press up the back button, system knows like in this fragment there was fragment 1 before and it will go back to the first fragment. So this is why like back stack is required, and like we can put up back stack over here and we can just say fragment transaction dot add to backstack, and we can just give the string name and we can say that it is a second fragment. It is a say what backstack it belongs to, fragment activity. Let us give it this name. Let me save it, and this way it will make up the record in the backstack. So it does not make up the record automatically, I guess, and this is how it makes up the record in backstack. So you can read out here which says that backstack is managed by the activity. Each backstack entry in the activity is record of the fragment transaction that occurred. So you can replace it, you can remove it, you can delete it. So every like uh, action you perform will be stacked one over the other. And at the end it says that the backstack allows the user to reverse a fragment transaction, navigate backwards. This is what I said. Press the back button, it knows where to go, right? Then this is like something which is important. You will notice that when a fragment is detached, its on pause, on stop, on destroy view methods are called. So as per this life cycle, we see that whenever like you detach a fragment, all these methods are called. On the other hand, when the fragment is removed rather than detaching, then like on pause, on stop, on destroy, and also on destroy and on detached are called, right? So in the similar way, like you can just try various like scenarios by putting up the logs and see what all like gets called up at what all places. I've already explained you that it is very similar up to the life cycle of an activity. So if I just move ahead next to this picture, so now we have already discussed that fragment in your activity layout can be done using two ways. So one is the fragment like element, which is the static way, and then by like adding it using the code, which is the dynamic way. And then if I move forward, so like there is one more thing which you should know. So here in this first fragment, if you see that we have extended up the fragment, which is the base class for fragments, But you could have also extended up dialog fragment, list fragment, preference fragment, compact. So these are different kind of fragments specific to a purpose. So when you say that you need a dialog box inside a fragment which has a good animation while coming in or while going out, then you can use a dialog fragment. You can see that displays a floating dialog. Similarly, if you want a list inside a fragment, you can straight away use a list fragment which is already using a simple cursor adapter, and you would not have to implement the adapter like by yourself. Or like obviously you get so many methods which makes up your work easy. And in the similar way, you have one more preference fragment come back, which like displays the hierarchy of preference objects as a list. So anyhow, like I have not deep dived into it. You can go ahead and like study further. My intention was to make sure that you understand and is capable of working alone on Android. Then if you see that we have inflate method, if you see of the inflate method is inside the fragment. If you see the fragment class, it extends fragment. It has few parameters. We are actually not using it. You can see that this function is not being used. It is created automatically. This is not required. But if you see the on view method, in this on view method, we have an inflator, and this inflator has three arguments. So the first argument is like you can see that we say that r dot layout, which layout has to be inflated. So this is inflated dot inflate. This is a function which returns up a view group. Sorry, a view. You can see that this is returning up a view. Inflator dot inflate returns up a view, and this view is like placed on this particular container or view group. This is the view group. And as you're putting up on this container, so that's why we have made attached to root false, because if you're not putting up to the container, you can say attached to root true, and it will like put it up on the root container. So there are a lot of things which you can try up with the fragments, and like this is something which is very important for you to build up a excellent and a performance effective application in Android. Then if I just go ahead and see some more of the pictures. So these are for few of the functions which can be used with fragment transaction and fragment manager. So as you can see that in fragment manager you have find fragment by ID. You can find the fragments by ID or tag, and then you can pop back the stack. It means that from the stack you can pop up the last element, delete it maybe. Add on the listener. If backstack has been changed, you can add up a listener and make changes in your database as per the user entries. You can like record the user entries this way. There are a lot of things which you can implement while using up fragments, and like I had tried to like jot down all the major and important things required for you to build up an advanced level fragment application. So let us move ahead on our application and now like add up the button with the fragments. So for adding up the buttons, we will go up to the activity. So the activity was fragmented activity, which is here. Let me like open it, and here in this class, let me first say button. So let me go to my activity layout and see what I have over here. So it's nothing but a button. So let me alt enter and import class and say button for swapping. Copy it. Let me go down over here. Let me save it, paste it, and say find ID. Find the ID of this button. Uh, Button dot fragment button. So the ID is button. So now we have this button, And inside this button, let us like place up a listener, which is swapping dot listener. Add on click listener. So we need an on click listener. So let me say on click. So set on click listener, and inside this we have to create up an object of on click listener, new on click listener. Let me implement the methods, which is on click view. So as on click happens to this button, this will move up to this on click method, and as it like moves up to the on click method, let me just copy in this code and paste it over here. And here let me say that dot replace it with this fragment, and this will be the first fragment. And let me just paste it over here. So we have on click listener set. So what exactly is on click listener? So we can listen to various actions which can be performed on the components which we see on UI. We can listen to the touch, we can listen to the click, then we can listen to the swipe movement. So we have a lot of listeners. So you can just go ahead and like take the control of the like the component and just type in the component ID and say dot and type in listener. So as you type in listener, LIS, so you get all the listeners out here. You can see that set on click listener. Then you have remove listener. Then you have key listener. Then you have background tint something, and there can be a lot of other listener on touch listener, set on touch listener. So in the similar way, you have a lot of listeners. So here we are like checking it up for the click, and that's why we are doing it. Now let me pause the application and let me run it again. Gradle is building up down, and it is now launching up the activity. As it launches up the activity, I just move ahead, and as of now you can see that I get this. Let me click on this button. So as I clicked on this button, this fragment changed to another fragment, and the good part was like this activity did not like change. It was so quick. It was not the case which we saw in the previous like chapter where we were moving from one activity to another. It was taking up a lot of time, but here it was so quick. So this is the magic of dynamic fragments, and this is a very important concept in Android. I am reiterating it. It is very important concept in like Android to build up a good performing Android application. So thank you guys. Have a great day, and let us meet up again in the next chapter.